the janitor in the throne room. The marble floor of the Zalthirian throne hall gleamed like liquid moonlight, a seamless expanse of silver-white stone that stretched for nearly 200 paces from the great entrance arch to the emperor's dais. Every morning, before the court's political machinery awoke, before the royal guard marched into position, and before the scented air of the capital filled with the perfumes of 100 visiting delegations, it was silent. Completely silent, except for the quiet, rhythmic sound of a mop sliding back and forth. Isaac Wren kept his head down as he worked, his reflection warping in the wet sheen of the marble. The bucket at his side was dented, the mop handle cracked near the base, but the bristles were worn to the exact softness he liked. The tools were older than most of the palace staff and, if rumors were true, older than some of the junior court officials. Isaac liked it that way. He was the only human in the palace, and as far as he knew, the only one in the entire Zalthirian capital. To the Zalthirians, scaled, tall, with eyes that shimmered in blues and greens, humans were rare imports from the backwater sector of Orion's Edge. And to most of them, Isaac was not even a person, just the janitor. He liked that. Kept him invisible. It was why he was there at all. The palace was waking up. From the far end of the hall, servants in layered silks padded softly past, carrying trays laden with scrolls and sealed crystal cylinders for the royal scribes. Two guards, armored in black lacquered plate, nodded at each other and took position beside the throne doors. Neither looked at Isaac. No one ever did, which was fine, except today there was a tension in the air. Isaac noticed it the moment he came in through the service corridor. The guards at the gate had been whispering sharply to each other, and the air inside the palace had been thicker, more charged. Even now, he could feel it. Something was coming. A shift in the current. He didn't need to wonder for long. The double doors at the far end of the throne hall burst open, slamming against the carved obsidian walls. A wave of courtiers swept in, their silks rippling like a tide, their jeweled horns glittering under the skylight beams. At their center, surrounded by a coil of black-armored guards, strode King Zalthirian himself. Isaac didn't glance up. He never did. The trick was to keep working, never draw the eye. But the king's voice was impossible to ignore. "Clear the hall." Zalthirian's command rolled through the space, deep and resonant. The courtiers scattered at once, bowing low as they fled to the side corridors. The guards stepped aside from the main path, their boots striking the marble like drumbeats. Isaac kept mopping. "You!" The king's voice cut sharply. "Human." Isaac froze. The mop handle was slick under his hands. He looked up for the first time, and the sight hit him like a shockwave. King Zalthirian was massive even for a Zalthirian. Taller than any guard, with blackened gold scales that reflected the skylight like molten metal. His eyes were deep, twin storms of green and blue, unblinking as they fixed on Isaac. "You will remain," the king said. Isaac's pulse quickened. Remain? No one spoke to him, much less ordered him to stay in the presence of the throne. The king turned to his advisors. "Leave us." The throne hall emptied until it was just the two of them, one ruler of an interstellar empire, and one janitor with a mop. For several seconds, the silence was total. Then the king descended the dais steps, his heavy boots echoing. "I have observed you," Zalthirian said slowly. "Every morning, you work in silence. You see everything, and yet you do not speak. Not to the guards, not to the scribes, not even to the servants." Isaac kept his expression neutral. He had learned long ago that silence was more powerful than any lie. The king studied him for another long moment, then spoke in a voice that was quieter, yet far heavier. "I require counsel, and I will have it from you." Isaac almost laughed, but he caught himself. "Your Majesty, I clean floors." Zalthirian's mouth curved, not into a smile, but something colder. "Exactly. You are not one of my advisors, bound by court alliances or family debts. You are not a merchant seeking profit, nor a soldier vying for promotion. You are outside." Isaac tilted his head. "And you think that means I'll tell you the truth?" The king stepped closer, his shadow falling over Isaac. "It means you have nothing to gain or lose, by telling me what I do not want to hear. The truth was, Isaac did have something to lose. A great deal, in fact. But the king didn't know that, and Isaac intended to keep it that way. Still, this was strange. In all his time here, no one in the palace had treated him as anything but background noise. Now the ruler of the Zalthirian Empire was looking at him as if he were a key to something. "I'm listening," Isaac said cautiously. Zalthirian's eyes flickered, approval, maybe, or just calculation. "The alliance with the Draventh clans is fracturing. My war council urges me to move first, to strike before they rally their fleets. My economic ministers warn that war will cripple the grain routes from the rim. My generals assure me the Draventh will break in a single season of campaigns. My historians remind me they said the same thing before the Othran War, when we lost an entire generation." He paused, his gaze boring into Isaac. "What do you say?" Isaac's mind raced. This was dangerous territory, not just politically, personally, because he had been on a Draventh world once, years before he ever became a janitor. He knew what their fleets could do, and he knew the Zalthirians were underestimating them. But to speak that truth to a king who might see it as weakness, that was the sort of thing that could end a man's life in this hall. So he chose his words with care. "Your Majesty," Isaac said, leaning on the mop handle, "I've cleaned a lot of floors, and one thing I've learned, you don't start scrubbing a stain until you know what it's made of. If it's ink, you need one kind of cleaner. If it's blood—" He let the pause stretch. "You need another. Use the wrong one and you make it worse. Sometimes permanent." The king's gaze sharpened. "You are saying I should wait?" "I'm saying," Isaac replied, "that if you act before you know exactly what you're dealing with, you'll do damage you can't undo. And maybe to yourself." A slow, almost imperceptible shift passed through Zalthirian's expression. Not agreement, but interest. "You speak boldly for one so low." Isaac shrugged. "You asked for the truth." The king stood silent for a long moment, then turned and began walking back toward the dais. "When the court meets at midday," Zalthirian said without looking back, "you will be here. I will ask my council for their counsel. And then I will ask you." Isaac blinked. "Me? In front of your council?" The king glanced over his shoulder, and for the first time, there was something almost like a smile on his face. "Yes, I want them to hear a voice they cannot predict." And then he was gone, disappearing behind the carved obsidian doors. Isaac stood alone in the great hall, mop in hand, the marble floor gleaming under the skylights. For years, he had made himself invisible. That was how he survived here, how he kept certain secrets buried. But now the king had seen him, and in a place like this, being seen could be the most dangerous thing of all. The king's problem. The grand hall of the Zyrathian palace glimmered with walls plated in reflective crystal and gold-veined alloy. Rows of towering alien guards stood motionless, their jagged armor catching the glow of the floating lantern spheres above. Outside, the twin suns of Zyrith Prime sank low on the horizon, flooding the capital with deep orange light. Evan Holt, the palace janitor, pushed his battered cleaning cart across the polished obsidian floor. Every squeak of its rusted wheels seemed impossibly loud in the vaulted chamber. He avoided making eye contact with the guards, though their glowing eyes tracked his every movement. He had been working here for 8 months, long enough to learn that most of the palace staff never addressed the king unless summoned, and definitely never gave him advice. The Zyrathian monarch was known to be unpredictable. One servant had been reassigned to deep ocean mining duty simply for forgetting to bow low enough. Evan figured his best strategy was to keep his head down, mop the floors, and get his pay transferred to his Earth account. But fate had an odd sense of humor. The echo of heavy footsteps broke the silence. From behind the colossal throne carved from a single block of black crystal, the king himself emerged. A towering alien with armor fused to his very skin, adorned in a ceremonial cloak that shimmered like liquid metal. His 4 insectoid eyes blinked in slow, deliberate patterns, and the ridges of his crown-like headplate gleamed under the lantern light. King Zalthirin, ruler of the Zyrathian Empire, conqueror of 12 systems, destroyer of the Trelvith swarm. and now walking straight toward Evan. The janitor froze, his mop still in hand. The guards stiffened even more, their weapons shifting slightly as if preparing for something. Evan opened his mouth to mumble something respectful, but the king spoke first, his voice a resonant growl that vibrated in Evan's ribs. "You, human." Evan straightened awkwardly. "Yes, your majesty?" The king stopped a few feet away, looming over him. "You are the one they call the Earth Custodian, are you not?" Evan hesitated. Yeah, I guess you could say that." "I have observed you," the king continued, as if this was a normal thing for a ruler to say to his janitor. "You work in silence. You do not gossip. You do not boast. And you do not meddle in matters that do not concern you." Evan thought that was the point of being a janitor, but he kept quiet. The king's mandibles clicked softly before he said, "And yet, perhaps it is your very detachment that I require." Evan frowned. "Require? For what?" The king's gaze shifted past him, toward the long, sealed balcony doors that overlooked the capital. "There is a problem. One that has eluded my advisors, my warlords, and my scholars. They tell me what they think I wish to hear. They hide truths behind ceremony. I require a voice untainted by politics." Evan stared at him. "And you think I'm that voice?" "I think," the king rumbled, "that you are a man who cleans filth for a living, and so you know when something is dirty, no matter how well it is hidden." Evan blinked. "That's one way to put it." The king turned and strode toward the balcony doors. With a flick of his clawed hand, they slid open, revealing the city below. A sprawling expanse of spires, skyways, and hovering transports that gleamed like a jewel under the dying suns. But in the distance, over the industrial sector, a faint black haze curled upward into the sky. "You see it," the king said. Evan squinted. "Smoke." "Yes," the king replied. "And not from any fire we allow to burn. That is rot, political rot, corruption seeping into the veins of my city." His voice hardened. "The council insists it is nothing. My guards report inconsistencies, shipments disappearing, credits vanishing from state accounts. Yet none dare confront the merchants and nobles responsible. All fear to lose their place in the web." Evan leaned on his mop. "And you think I can do something about that?" "I think you can see what they will not," the king said. "A man who does not play their games may walk where others cannot. You are beneath notice, yet you hear much. You clean their chambers. You move through the palace unseen. You will go to the city's underlayers. You will tell me where the rot begins." Evan raised both hands. Whoa, your majesty, I'm just here to clean floors, not investigate royal conspiracies." "That sounds like something that could get me, killed." The king's eyes narrowed. "I will ensure your protection. You will have unrestricted access. You will be given a guard detail or not if you prefer to remain unseen. You will report only to me." Evan hesitated. His instincts screamed to decline. But there was something in the king's tone, not a threat, but trust. And, if he was being honest, the janitor part of him was curious. He'd noticed things before. Strange crates being delivered at odd hours. Locked rooms no one ever entered. Whispers in languages he didn't recognize. The king stepped closer, his voice low. "The last man I trusted with this matter was found dissolved in an acid vat. I do not trust easily. But I have watched you. You see things others miss. You clean what others will not touch. If you refuse, I will not command you. But I will know that the rot will grow unchecked." Evan took a slow breath. "All right, I'll look into it. No promises." The king's mandibles twitched, a Zyrathian smile. "Good." That night, Evan was given a small wrist device, a secure communicator keyed directly to the king's private channel. He also received a subtle change in his palace clearance. Doors that had once been locked now slid open at his approach. He began the next day as usual, pushing his cart down the east wing. But instead of sticking to the usual hallways, he took detours. He checked storerooms and used corridors, even maintenance shafts. And he started noticing patterns. The kitchen staff kept complaining about missing supply deliveries, always ones meant for the lower city districts. The maintenance crew talked about strange instructions to reroute power at odd times. And one night, while passing a cargo bay, Evan saw a group of cloaked figures unloading sealed containers marked with the emblem of a noble house, containers that reeked faintly of fuel and something metallic. He didn't confront them. He just watched, memorizing their movements, their ship's insignia. When he reported to the king later that week, Zalthran listened in silence. When Evan finished, the king asked only one question. "Do you know whose mark that was?" Evan shook his head. The king's eyes darkened. "It belongs to Lord Vren, one of my most trusted nobles. Or so I believed." Evan swallowed. "So what now?" The king's gaze turned toward the city beyond the balcony once more. "Now we clean house." But there was something in his tone, a quiet, controlled fury, that made Evan realize this was just the beginning. The weight of the crown. The grand hall was silent except for the steady hum of the palace's ventilation systems. Under the vaulted ceilings of crystal and stone, the alien king sat slumped upon his throne, a towering seat carved from the bones of some ancient leviathan. Around him, the alien courtiers stood in their flowing garments, eyes darting nervously between their ruler and the lone human who stood near the center of the room with a mop in hand. Daniel was still wearing his janitor's coveralls, stained from years of scrubbing marble floors, mending rusted hinges, and hauling broken furniture out of forgotten wings. Yet now, for reasons he still couldn't entirely understand, every eye in the royal chamber was fixed on him. The alien king's voice was a deep, resonating rumble. Not the booming authority Daniel had expected, but something softer, almost tired. "Human Daniel, you told me once that war is not won by the strongest army, but by the one that understands the ground they fight upon. Tell me." The king leaned forward, his 4 golden eyes narrowing. "What do I do when the ground itself has turned against me?" Daniel swallowed, trying to ignore the weight of the courtier's stares. He had no training in diplomacy, no grand education in alien politics. He was a janitor. His life had been defined by tools, cleaning agents, and knowing which corridor doors squeaked the loudest. But maybe that was the point. He glanced around the hall. The alien guards stood rigid, their weapons gleaming. A few noble advisors shifted in discomfort, whispering to each other in their native tongue. A series of melodic clicks and deep thrumming notes. Their posture screamed disdain. To them, Daniel was dirt under their boots. Still, the king had asked, and Daniel had never been one to ignore someone in need. "Your Majesty," Daniel began slowly, "if the ground's turned against you, that means you've been standing still for too long." The words hung in the air. A few courtiers scoffed openly. One, a tall, reptilian creature draped in ceremonial silk, stepped forward. "This is absurd. You bring a cleaner to speak of statecraft? The council should." The king silenced him with a single glance. Daniel pressed on. "Back on Earth, we had a saying, if the floor's rotting under your feet, you either fix it or you move. Problem is, fixing it takes more time than you might have. So the question is, can you move before it swallows you whole?" The king's expression shifted. His heavy brow furrowed, but there was a glint in his eyes now, the faintest ember of curiosity. Daniel could tell he'd struck something. For weeks now, rumors had been spreading through the palace. Whispers of rebellion in the outer systems, supply lines collapsing, even hints that some of the king's own advisors might be plotting against him. Daniel hadn't meant to overhear, but mops and buckets had a way of carrying him into places where people forgot he was even there. He'd seen the cracks forming, not in marble but in trust. The palace staff spoke in hushed tones, deliveries were late, and even the once pristine gardens had begun to wither without proper care. The king sat back, long fingers curling over the armrests of his throne. "You speak as though I could simply walk away from my throne." Daniel shook his head. "Not walk away. Shift your footing. Change the rules before the floor collapses." The courtiers exchanged baffled glances. To them, it was just human nonsense. But Daniel knew the king understood, because ruling a kingdom wasn't so different from fixing a crumbling palace wing. Sometimes you couldn't rebuild while you were still standing in the rubble. The king rose from the throne with a slow, deliberate movement. His towering frame cast a shadow over Daniel. You suggest movement, displacement, to relocate the core of power until stability returns. Daniel gave a small nod. Something like that. And maybe stop letting the termites sit at your table. That earned him a sharp intake of breath from the entire court. One of the elder advisors stepped forward, hissing through his jagged teeth. Your Majesty, this human insults us. No, the king interrupted, his voice like a blade sliding free of its sheath. He speaks plainly, and I value plain speech when the air is thick with poison. The alien monarch descended the steps of his throne, his ornate robes whispering against the polished floor. He stopped just a few feet from Daniel, tilting his massive head as if studying some rare artifact. Do you know what they call you among the staff, human Daniel? Daniel shifted uneasily. The guy who always fixes the coffee machine? A faint smile, or the alien equivalent, touched the king's lips. They call you the listener. You clean and you hear. You mend what is broken, but more importantly, you notice what is breaking before it collapses. Daniel wasn't sure what to say to that. He'd never thought of his work that way. To him, fixing a cracked tile or tightening a bolt was just part of the job. But maybe that habit of noticing, of seeing problems before they became disasters, was the same skill the king needed now. The chamber doors opened suddenly, and a messenger rushed in, kneeling before the throne. Your Majesty, the outer system of Vorith has declared secession. They have seized control of the trade gates. A murmur rippled through the courtiers. The reptilian advisor's eyes gleamed with something Daniel didn't like: satisfaction. The king's gaze swept over the room, then returned to Daniel. If you were me, human, what would you do? Daniel exhaled slowly, glancing down at his mop. The answer wasn't complicated, but it wasn't going to be popular either. I'd stop patching cracks and start rebuilding the foundation, with people I trust, not just the ones wearing fancy robes. That set the court buzzing with outrage. A few advisors shouted in protest, accusing Daniel of treachery, of undermining the sacred hierarchy. But the king lifted a hand, silencing them with a single command. Enough! This council is adjourned. All except the listener remain. The courtiers reluctantly filed out, shooting Daniel looks that ranged from contempt to outright hostility. The grand doors shut behind them with a heavy thud, leaving the vast chamber echoing with the sound of the king's slow, measured steps. The king approached Daniel once more, lowering his voice. You have given me much to think about, human. But know this, if I act upon your advice, there will be blood. My enemies will not stand idle while I shift my throne. Daniel met his gaze. Then maybe it's time you made sure the people standing closest to you aren't the ones holding the knives. For a long moment, the two just stood there. A king burdened by the weight of a crumbling empire, and a janitor who had never been meant to stand in these halls at all. Then the king nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. You may return to your duties, listener, but soon, I may have need of you again. Daniel gave a small, awkward salute with his mop. I'll be around. As he walked out of the grand hall, he realized something unsettling. He wasn't just cleaning floors anymore. Somehow, he'd stepped onto a much larger battlefield. And if he wasn't careful, the ground here could give way beneath him too. The advice that changed a kingdom. The throne room was quieter than it had ever been. No bustling servants, no armored guards shuffling in the shadows, no courtly laughter or the endless drone of advisors. Only the alien king, his eyes dimmed to a thoughtful silver hue, sat on his crystalline throne. And opposite him stood Elias Carter, the human janitor, mop in hand. The king's crown, an intricate circlet of woven starlight, rested loosely in his claws. It looked heavy, not in the literal sense but in the way that a mountain was heavy. Elias didn't say anything at first. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. You wish to speak to me? The king finally said, his deep voice reverberating through the empty chamber. But this time, not about cleaning floors. Elias gave a small shrug. You're the one who asked me for advice, Your Majesty. Just making sure you're ready to hear it. The king gave a humorless laugh. Ready? My empire teeters on collapse. My advisors whisper of rebellion, and my own heir questions my judgment. If I am not ready for counsel now, I never will be. Elias set the mop bucket down, leaned on the handle and studied the alien ruler. I've been listening, these past few weeks while scrubbing the palace halls. The staff talk, the guards gossip, and the walls. He tapped a pillar with the mop's end. Have a way of carrying sound. I've heard enough to know your kingdom's problem isn't the rebels. It's you. The king stiffened. You tread dangerously close to insolence, human. Maybe, but you wanted the truth, not flattery. And the truth is, you've been ruling like a warlord in peacetime. You won a war years ago, but you're still fighting it in your head. You can't see your people's needs now, only the threats you imagine they pose. The king's eyes narrowed, but he didn't interrupt. Elias stepped forward, voice steady. Back on Earth, I used to work in a hospital. Not as a doctor. I was a janitor there too. I'd see patients come in, people hurt, scared, or just plain lost. Some doctors treated them like problems to fix, others like people to help. Guess which ones actually healed the most? The king tilted his head. The ones who saw them as people? Elias nodded. That's your problem. You're so busy ruling an empire that you've forgotten you're ruling people. Different species, sure, but people all the same. They need more than orders and taxes. They need to know you see them. The king's voice dropped to a near whisper. You think I have forgotten them? I think you've been afraid to remember. Silence again. The king stared at the floor for a long time before speaking. When I was young, my father told me a king must be a wall. Unyielding, unbreakable. I took his words to heart. I believed that if I showed any softness, the galaxy would devour us. Elias leaned the mop against the wall and sat down on the steps of the throne, ignoring protocol. There's a difference between being a wall and being a prison. A wall keeps your people safe. Prison keeps them locked away. Right now, you've built a prison without realizing it. The king let out a deep exhale. You speak simply, human. Yet your words cut deeper than the speeches of my greatest scholars. That's because I'm not trying to impress you, Elias said with a small smile. I'm trying to help you. The shift. Word of the private conversation spread faster than wildfire in the palace. Some said the king had been insulted by the janitor and was plotting his execution. Others whispered that the king had listened, really listened, for the first time in years. Elias didn't know which version was true until he was summoned again 3 days later. When he entered the throne room, the difference was immediate. The heavy tension that had always hung in the air was gone. The king's eyes, once cold and calculating, now held a strange light. I have been thinking about your words, the king began, and I realize now I have ruled as if my people owed me their loyalty by birthright. I have not earned it in years. That ends now. Elias raised an eyebrow. So, what's the plan? The king's mandibles clicked in thought. I will walk among them, not as their ruler but as their equal. I will speak to them directly. I will see their struggles with my own eyes. My advisors will think me mad, but perhaps madness is what we need. Elias smirked. Now you're talking. Walking among the people. The first time the alien king stepped out into the capital without his royal escort, the city froze. He wore no crown, only a simple travel cloak. Elias walked beside him, carrying nothing but his mop handle like a staff. Market vendors stopped calling out their wares. Children peeked from behind their parents. Some citizens dropped to one knee. Others simply stared in shock. The king approached a fruit seller whose stand was sagging from disrepair. You there. How fares your business? The vendor's eyes widened in fear. Am I king? I. Not as your king, he interrupted gently. As your neighbor. The vendor hesitated, then spoke honestly. Bad, sire. The tariffs on goods from the outer systems make it hard to stock my stall. Many of us have had to raise prices, and the people cannot afford them. The king listened in silence, then asked, if the tariffs were lowered, We could trade more freely, feed more families, keep the markets alive. The king placed a clawed hand on the vendor's shoulder. Then it will be done. Elias watched as the king spent the entire day like this, speaking to workers, farmers, children, asking questions no ruler had asked in decades, listening more than he spoke. By sunset, something had shifted. The people no longer looked at him with fear. They looked at him with hope. The final advice. Weeks passed. Policies changed. Tariffs were reduced. Unjust laws repealed. Public forums established. The kingdom began to hum with new life. One evening, Elias was summoned again to the throne room. This time it was not empty. It was filled with advisors, nobles, and guards. All stood silent as the king approached Elias with something in his hands. It was a medallion, forged from silver and obsidian, bearing the royal crest. "You came here as a janitor," the king said, his voice carrying across the hall. "And you remain a janitor. But you have also become something far greater, a keeper of truth. My court has titles for warriors, scholars, and diplomats. But for you, I create a new one, advisor of the people." Elias blinked. "That sounds a little above my pay grade." The king smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "It is not pay I offer, but trust. Continue to tell me when I err. Remind me when I forget my people. That is all I ask." Elias took the medallion slowly, feeling its weight. "Well, I suppose I can clean up more than floors." The throne room erupted in quiet laughter, something that hadn't happened in years. Epilogue. Years later, historians would speak of the silent advisor who turned an empire's course without ever holding a sword or commanding an army. They would say the king's reign became one of prosperity because of a single human who saw past the crown to the person beneath. And if you asked Elias Carter about it, he'd just shrug, pick up his mop, and say, "I just cleaned the place up a bit."